Well, good morning, everybody. Thought I'd share this little sign that we came across in Anchor Bay when I was up there last week. It's a niche. I don't know. I may have to go after FSBOs, but specifically those for sale by wife. Anyway, the property had a big old, what was it? Lincoln, one of those really long old Lincoln automobiles in the yard too. We wonder if she was going to sell that too. Anyway, welcome everybody. Hi Heather. It looks like you're the only one on screen, but that's okay. Everyone else is hiding out. Okay, I have a few things to cover this week, and then Heather has some her bit, and I'll start with this broker risk management weekly practice tip that I sent out on Monday. This is a really good review of the new request for repair form. And if you haven't looked at it, go back to the email I sent on Monday with the weekly practice tip and pull this up and be sure to read it. The form was modified in a number of respects, and there's some important practice tips that Vicki gives us in that tip. And one is in paragraph 4 here. Paragraph 4 says, if the seller agrees to buyer's request to, or the buyer accepts seller's partial agreement as specified in section 2 by signing in section 3, then the RR form obligates the buyer to take both of the following 2 actions. The default is to remove the investigation of property contingency in its entirety, which can be modified by checking the box and specifying any exceptions. Note the blank line is rather short, or attaching a signed CR form, which will better clarify what aspects of the investigation contingency the buyer is or is not willing to remove. And then 4B is a checkbox that the buyer releases the seller of all claims regarding the disclosed condition of the property. Note, it is not clear in this release that it only applies to conditions disclosed before the date of the RR. This is potentially dangerous for the buyers, but sellers should not rely on it too heavily on this release, since it does not comply with Civil Code 1542, and thus claims for unknown conditions are probably not released. Okay, and this is the important note that I kind of observed. If the buyer prefers to wait to see what action the seller takes before committing to remove all or any contingencies, then the buyer can include in 1A the following statement: paragraphs 4A and 4B of this request for repairs are stricken. So that's an interesting thing. We in the past, we've taught that we should attach the buyer's agent, and the buyer should attach the CR form to the RR. And this is kind of guiding us down the path of not attaching it, but letting it come back after the sellers made their decision about what they're willing to do. I'll get to your question in a second, Alejandro. And then the second part in the practice tips was this caution in bold letters: buyers should not automatically move all contingencies simply because the seller has agreed to make certain repairs, and should not attach a contingency removal form with the RR. So again, this is kind of reversing what our practice was before, that we would attach a CR form with the RR. And it says, at the very least, the buyers should be encouraged to exclude from the removal of the investigation contingency quote, investigating the adequacy and sufficiency of agreed seller's repairs and or anything the buyer needs. So let me stop sharing that. And Alejandro, what is your question?
Okay, so for what I understand in the beginning, the paper that you sent, it talked about the issue that the seller, find out that the seller need to do some repairs, but and then after find out there was more work to be done, and that's what created the discrepancy, like there was the problem there. So the question is, in the format, it doesn't really say, should we put a clause, a special clause that says, okay, if it is something, because it wasn't really clear to me that if there is something beyond that it needs to be repaired, who is responsible for? And that's my question, is like, to me, I don't know if maybe new language for me, that I don't understand it well enough, that it says, what should we do to, cover that part from either party? It's like, or what do we do?
Okay. Let me pull up the form and look at it that way. Okay, so I'm gonna hide this here. So the buyer's request, there's these four under one. There's A, B, C, and D. So the buyer requests that you check all that are applicable. So you can check multiple one of these. These aren't exclusive. So the first is buyer requested seller prior to final verification of condition repair or take the other specified action for each item listed below. And you could attach a list if you had a list of them. Repair fence, section 1, repairs. That's covered below, I think. Yeah. So we want to do section 1 repair. So it could be repair fence, repair screen door. It could be numerous things there that you might ask the seller to repair. And if you were going to, this is where you would add the language that is in this form here. Paragraph 4. Yeah, paragraph 4A and 4B are stricken. So that could be one thing you would do to make repairs. Oops, sorry. And she makes a point in the practice tip. And again, I really encourage you to go back and look at the practice tip that I sent out Monday. If you can't find it, just email me. I'll send it out again. Or you can go to the website, Broker Risk Management, and get to it there. And I appreciate, I get calls from agents once in a while, and they say, I went on the Broker Risk Management website and found what I needed. But I just wanted to confirm with you, so that's a resource we pay for and you pay for. So use it, because you can't always reach me or Randy when you have a question. And most of the issues we deal with are covered in the weekly practice tips. But anyway, so be sure to check the box. If you're going to write something out here and you don't check the box, then it creates ambiguity. It becomes ambiguous about whether that section applies or not. So don't check it if you're not writing anything, but do check it if you're writing something in there. And then B, you got the section 1, you could have the request buyer to pay for section 1, seller to pay to have section 1 work completed as specified in the attached pest control report dated. And you can put in the date, the report by termite company. So that's another one. You could request section 2 work. If buyer requests either section 1 or section 2 work above, the seller shall have no later than 5 days prior to close of escrow to deliver to buyer a written pest control certification showing the work was done. So that's another option. And then you could ask for credit. Besides that, we want $5,000.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
for no reason at all, you could just ask for $5,000. I mean, you should have a reason. At least the seller's agent going to ask you, well, why do you want $5,000? So. And finally, you could ask for the seller to reduce the purchase price. And then, have a new purchase price. It's $545 now instead of whatever it was, $565. So those are the 4 things that you could do there. Yeah, Alejandro, did that address any part of your question?
But in the case, I mean, the case, it says in the situation of, okay, the seller makes some repairment, but then they find out while doing the repairs, they find out there is more issue.
Right.
And then the seller doesn't want to do it, and that's create the situation. How we cover that as?
Yeah. Okay, so you're talking about things that get found after perhaps the initial request for repair is made. And then those will come under what we call additional disclosures. If the termite company started working on the termite repair and then opened a wall and found there was much more damage, they're going to create a new report that's going to get sent to the buyer, and then the seller and buyer are going to negotiate around that issue. So it's not a fait accompli that the seller is going to have to do that per se, because he's only, you recall here, we put in there that, sorry, where did I go? We put in here that he's going to do the section 1 work as the report dated 1/6/22. Now, if they start doing the work on January 20th, and they find new stuff, then there's going to be a new report, and you're going to have to renegotiate what happens with that new report. So stuff that becomes known after the RR is made, you usually become a new seller disclosure, which then opens up negotiations again around the RR. Does that sound right, Heather? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's why, Vicky, that last statement you were just going over, exactly why she's saying that is because the buyer has to be sure that the seller is doing adequate repairs and,
right,
that they don't just cover it back up.
Right. And it's interesting because I was looking at, let me look at pull up the CR now, because let's go back and open the CR form. And this is the one where she's saying, don't release you should at least reserve the investigating the adequacy and sufficiency of agreed seller's repairs. So if you go down here and you're going to put all buyer contingencies are removed except and other, and then you're going to type in this language she has, which is buyer's investigation investigating the adequacy of and sufficiency, good legal language here, see, of agreed sellers repairs. Now this line didn't add extra lines like I think it's supposed to. So you would probably then say see attached and type that onto an addendum to this contingency removal. Yeah. So that's interesting. Now, I must say, in my experience, there's most agents aren't asking for the seller to make repairs. They're just asking for a credit. And, you know, plus the seller's getting ready to move. The seller doesn't want to do that. They're busy getting, you know, getting out of the house. You talk to the other agent and they say, well, he'll give you a credit, but you gotta, you know, your person's gonna have to do the work. And there is some risk in that because if you accept a credit for, say, the Section 1 work, which was $10,000, and you accept a credit of $7,500 from the seller, and then you go in, your buyer goes in and starts the work, and you find additional work, then they're on the hook for that because they've accepted the credit for it. So that can be a risk if you go that route. But wouldn't you say, Heather, that most times we aren't seeing this asking the seller to make repairs? It's more that we're seeing the buyers.
Not unless it's a VA or an FHA loan where it has to be done. I always encourage buyers to ask for credit just because you don't know the quality of the work that's going to be done as well. You know, I'd rather them get it done the way they want, and you know.
But that language is handy because investigating the adequacy and sufficiency of agreed sellers' repairs. You know, that kind of puts the seller on the hook to do it in a proper workmanlike manner, and may become a arm wrestling thing around whether it's adequate and sufficient. Okay, well, those are two kind of complicated items, so thought I'd start with those. We had a agent writing an offer this week on a property with a tenant. So let's look at the RPA and what the RPA says about that. This has changed from what we were used to, because it used to be in paragraph, I think it was 7. We're looking at the RPA here. I'm just going to skip over the grid for a minute, but I'll come back to it. But it used to say somewhere in this paragraph 7, closing possession, and it said seller occupied properties, and then it would have a box for tenant occupied properties. And you would in the RPA itself kind of choose what was going to happen with that tenant. The property should be delivered vacant or subject to the tenant's rights and blah, blah, blah. Now in the grid under M, possession, you're dealing with the time of possession, you're dealing with seller occupied or vacant units, and then you're dealing with tenant occupied units, M3. And you see there's no reference to a paragraph in the RPA. These are all references to paragraphs in the RPA that deals with this. You need to attach this new form, the TOPA. So if tenant occupied, the TOPA, you check there, is attached. Have any of you worked with this TOPA form yet? All right, well, let's go back and let's go look at the TOPA form. Okay. So this deals with tenant occupied property for when selling tenant occupied 1 to 4 unit properties. Wouldn't apply to 4 or over 4-unit properties. And then you have your normal recitals at the top. And then 1A, the default is tenants to remain in possession. Buyers shall take property subject to the rights of existing tenants and under the terms and conditions specified in paragraph 2. And then you have the B choice. The property or units blank shall be delivered vacant without existing tenants. If seller, after exercise of good faith, attempts and subject to applicable laws, unable to remove the existing tenants by close of escrow or 5 days prior to close of escrow, buyer may cancel this agreement, and buyer's sole remedy buyer's return of the deposits and buyer's reasonable out-of-pocket expenses, blah, blah, blah. Buyer may elect to proceed with the transaction with the tenants in possession and waives any claim for other damages or compensation arising out of the tenants remaining in possession. And then you get into paragraph 2 about tenant deposits, changes of the seller might negotiate with the tenant during the escrow and what happens then. This documentation the seller is going to give the buyer, the rental service agreement and income and expense statements, tenant estoppel certificates. You know, a estoppel certificate is basically a form. They now have a form, TEC, tenant estoppel certificate, that says it's completed by the seller and the seller's agent or the seller's agent, and gives, you know, and then the tenant looks it over and signs it and returns it. Now, if this is checked, it's an obligation of the seller to get this to the buyer. We had a transaction recently where this was checked. There was a commercial transaction, but this graph kind of applies. This was checked, but the seller never got the buyer a copy of the estoppel certificate. And it got down to, you know, a couple of weeks prior to closing, and the buyer said, hey, where's the estoppel certificate? So when we pushed back and got it from the seller's agent, and it turns out in the estoppel certificate that said the tenant was delinquent 2 months in their rent. Well, that's not a good thing, you know. And it was unfortunate to learn about it at such a late date. And it actually has caused the buyer to decide not to purchase the property because it was a major tenant. And after they saw the estoppel certificate, they contacted the tenant, said, hey, we'd like you to stay on. We're buying the property. And they said, well, we really don't want to. We really want to get out of our lease anyway. So, I mean, that could have been discovered, you know, 2 months earlier, but the seller never sent the estoppel certificate. So people aren't happy about that. But anyway, the TOPA form, just going back to the TOPA real quick. Let's see. Okay. So this gets signed whenever you have a tenant in the property. And it came up just today, a question from one of our agents was the buyer wants to make an offer on the property. It has a tenant and they'd like the property vacant. So what is the seller going to do about vacating the tenant? And so we referred them to one of several landlord tenant attorneys that we're familiar with to determine how the seller can deal with vacating the tenant. So again, that has to be, we don't know as real estate agents exactly how you vacate a tenant anymore. Unfortunately, that becomes a legal question. Okay, any questions on that stuff, the TOPA form? It's a new one. I hope you get to use it. It means you're writing offers. Okay, this has come up recently where the background on this one was that we're managing the property. One of our agents is also a property manager. And you shouldn't be a property manager without letting us know. Okay, because there's certain requirements around that. So if you decide to take on the property management, you know, let us know about it so we make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, because it's really a different business. No, that's not what I want. I'm sorry. Anyway, the seller, the buyer, the tenant, who our agent had put into the property, said, hey, I'd like to buy this property from the seller. So our agent contacted the seller, and the seller said, fine, have them write an offer. I don't want to pay a commission if they buy it. And so the agent worked out a buyer broker's agreement and the tenant was willing to pay our agent the commission, and proceeded with that and the offer and sent it over to the seller. But also what we need is a seller non-agency agreement, where the seller acknowledges that they have no representation, or at least we are not the representative relative to the sale. It talks about the broker compensation, that the broker's compensation would be from the buyer or the tenant, and so forth and so on. It's so assigned by the seller and by us. So if you get a decision, it could be a FSBO or a situation like this where it's a relationship, but the seller doesn't want representation, then we need this seller non-agency agreement. And in the past, we were told, well, we can't give the seller any forms, you know, to help them, you know, complete their, you know, like the TDS form or the SBQ form. But in fact, that's changed, and legally we are allowed to give the seller the forms. It doesn't make us what they would used to call an ostensible agent, meaning you became an agent by extension of doing certain things for the seller, and giving them forms was one of the things that they could say, well, you're their agent because you gave them the forms. But it's been clear in the legal cases that we can give them forms, but we do need them to sign this non-agency agreement. Okay. Let's see. The only other thing I want to cover is related to the amendment to the contract. Remember, we used to have separate forms, like if we want to extend an escrow or extend a contingency. And now we use this form, amendment of existing agreement terms. So you're in escrow, you're going to modify the terms. You could modify it by the revised purchase price, or close of escrow change, or any other number of things, contingency period, extended, blah, 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 blah. And so this is where you would do that kind of amendment to the existing terms. You wouldn't use an addendum. You use that amendment form. And finally, we've got an agent who's working with a buyer who is in an exchange that they're doing a 1031 exchange. Now they've already sold their down leg property, called the down leg property, the one they got to sell in order to buy the new one. And that money's already at the exchange company, so that's all good. And so they're making an offer, and they're going to we are attaching this buyer intention to exchange. Let's see where it is. Here we are, intention to exchange. And this has various clauses in it. It just says the seller is going to cooperate. What happens if the buyer fails, is unable to do this exchange? And there's options here. A is the transaction shall close without any extension of time. The close of escrow for this shall be extended by a maximum of blank days. This transaction shall be canceled and money returned to the buyer. So this protects the buyer just in case their down leg exchange falls apart for some reason. They may have it in escrow and they aren't yet closed. In the case I was talking about, it's already closed and the money is in the hands of the exchange company. But maybe you're making this offer and you haven't sold that down leg property yet, or it's in escrow, but it hasn't closed. Now, just for instance, this all came up, I think it was 180 days. So the tenant, where the tenant is wanting to buy the seller's home, the landlord's home, that landlord wants to do an exchange, but they don't know, they haven't even started looking around. So we wrote this buyer intent to exchange, giving the seller up to another 6 months to find their exchange property and to complete the arrangements, which was fine with the tenant because they're in the property anyway, and they've got a fixed price on the purchase. So, everybody's agreed to that. So that clause may come into effect from time to time. And then of course, there on the other side of that, if you're representing a seller and the seller wants to exchange, then this is sellers, the SXA form, the sellers intend to exchange, and same kind of conditions here. What happens if they fail? The transaction will close anyway, the transaction be extended, so forth and so on. So if you're dealing with exchanges, you're going to be using either the BXA or the SXA. And that's what I got for this week. All righty. Any questions, Eric? Eric, where'd you go? There you are. Can't hear you, Eric. Try again. Okay, well, your microphone is not working for some reason, Eric. So get that figured out. We'll come, huh?
Can you hear me now?
There you are. Okay,
Okay, am I still there?
you're there now. Yeah.
Okay, good. I was representing a buyer once on a 24-unit apartment building. And the seller gave us an accounting of the deposits being held by him that were to be transferred to the buyer, which is normal procedure for deposits to be transferred to the buyer.
Mhm.
And so he gave us an accounting and we said, well, we really should get estoppel certificates. And he was reluctant, but we said, it's normal procedure. We want estoppel certificates. And so we finally got the 24 estoppel certificates. There was a discrepancy of like $20,000 or $25,000 between the deposits the owner said he had and what the tenants verified was true and correct.
Ooh.
So we went to the seller's agent and we said, hey, there's a substantial discrepancy here, and it looks like the seller's pocketing about $25,000, and that the buyer's now gonna be on the hook for when these tenants move out.
Mm-hmm.
And so a couple of days went by and the agent got back to us and said, well, the seller felt he sold the property too quick, so he wanted to up his profit margin. So the moral of the story is the estoppel certificates are very, very important.
Yeah.
And if you've got a less than honest seller, it can be a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. Our buyer is feeling the seller in this commercial property that I just mentioned has been less than forthcoming about the condition and the relationship with the tenant. And the buyer spent $10,000 on investigations and loan fees, appraisals, and so forth. So not a happy camper right now. Heather, you had a question.
Yeah, I concerning the amendment versus addendum,
Yeah.
I am finding that most agents are still sending over addendums, even lenders are asking for them. How would you suggest that we respond. Do you want things redone as a amendments? And just,
Well, I mean, the difference between the amendment and the addendum. Let me just show you that, because it's the reason they made the amendment form as opposed to the addendum. The amendment form has this language down here, number 2, offer expiration. And it has a time period, which you can, the default is, I think, 3 days, 3rd day, yeah. And you can say other time frame. And it's to be signed by the appropriate party, either the buyer or the seller. And then accepted by the buyer. So if the buyer is creating this amendment, they sign here, the seller signs here. So in a sense, it becomes a form that if the seller doesn't respond, in this case, then it drops dead. Okay. But the transaction still is whole. The problem with the addendum was it had no such language. And essentially it becomes what Vicky refers to as a counteroffer. So all of a sudden you're writing it up a new thing here, and you're saying purchase price to be, and you put in your new purchase price. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry for my typing. And that's your addendum. And it's a counteroffer to what is already existing in the agreement. And the legal interpretation is that if the seller doesn't want to agree to that, they could just cancel the whole transaction. So to keep that from being a possibility, you use the amendment form, which has the timeframes built in. So it depends on what the addendum says, I guess. It's my short answer. If it's talking about timeframes or stuff like that. But if it's something that the parties haven't really agreed to and you aren't sure the seller is going to sign it, if you're writing it as a buyer's agent, I certainly would use the amendment form to protect yourself from the seller just plug on the whole transaction. Okay.
thank you. That really clarifies it.
Okay. So what do you got for us this week, Heather?
Okay, so this week I want to jump into ZipForms and show you a new resource we have in there for helping your clients fill out their seller disclosures. So let's see. Let me open that up, share screen right here. Okay, so our always challenging TDS and SPQ form. I still love sitting down with my clients and being with them when they fill it out, but a lot of times they do have to fill it out online, and we have a new option for that I think really covers things really well and answers a lot of their questions. So when you're in ZipForms, here I am in transactions. Can everybody see ZipForms right now? Yeah, okay. So when you go into a transaction, you'll start on the summary page and then just pop over to right here on this gray, pop over to documents. Once you're in documents, now why does that say enter search term? I don't know what that is. That's super weird. Anyways, right behind this, you can see there's a very small little shield shaped. Can you guys see that behind the enter search term? I don't know why that's there. What this is, it's called Seller's Shield. It's a new benefit that NAR or CAR is giving to us. So take a look at it right here. You just click on that. And the first time you go in, you do have to, register like anything else. I've already registered, so I'm not going to go through it all. It's really simple though. You put in your state, and then it asks you you put in that you're a real estate professional, and then it asks you for your email and a password. Once you've registered, let me pop over to show you what it looks like. You will get a screen that looks like this. Now, can everybody see the little seller shield up on the left side?
I'm still seeing the seller's disclosure,
First
the
one,
shield.
okay, here, let me pull
Yeah.
out. Sometimes it doesn't stay with me. Okay. All right, can you guys see it now? There's a,
Hold on 1 second. Yes, yes. there you go.
yep, okay, great, great. Okay, so you have the option to create seller disclosures and send them to your client right here. So all you have to do is on the right-hand side, this big blue button. Sometimes it says new disclosure and sometimes it says invite sellers. I don't know why it's different, but it does the exact same thing. You just click on that and then you're going to put in the property address. Now, if you already have a listing already in there, it can autofill some of this for you. But if you haven't really set it all up yet, then you just type in, I'm going to put in the old Santa Rosa office for some reason. But you just go through. One thing is the reason they are doing this is they're trying to get people to pay for basically protection insurance, which you can either buy for your clients or they can buy for you. If you don't want to do that, you just tell your sellers just to skip it. So for instance, I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And it is going to send this over. It used one of my old sellers. I don't know why, but it did. But we can pop over and see what it looks like for them. So let's see. Edit property. So I did a test this morning and it's so funny. It's not, let me just get back to the main page. Oh, I see why it's giving me the new disclosure. I've only just started using this yesterday. They just added it a few days ago. So let's go. I'm going to go into here.
How about the recently created? Would it be there? Oh, resume. Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Or maybe I just add, I need to add the 2, 3, 7, 8. All right, I'm going to go back to this one. You'll get a brand new, a new screen for. All right, let's see, why is it in here? I need to add. Looks like it's kind of frozen up here on me. I had great luck with it this morning. Okay. Thank you for being patient here. This is all for this one property, it seems. I need to go back. Here, give me 1 second. I will stop sharing and I'll go find the correct thing here. Just hold on for a second. I thought I had up what we needed. Go back to this. Sorry about this, guys. Just take me a second here, I would say. Yeah, it's not working. Okay, I'm going to show you this. So this I just sent over this morning. Go back to share screen. Okay, so this I sent over. What happens is that I wanted to send a brand new one, but it's not letting me. But what happens is your seller, once you send it, your seller will receive an email and they will just go in and register, and then they'll get access to fill out the document. They're not actually filling out the form, but it just asks them all the questions similar to Glide. And it's really nice because it adds these. So I sent over this morning residential earthquake risk disclosure. it gives them these little bright yellow things. And this is where there's often problems. And then this little question mark here is really nice because it gives them tips and information. So like on the TDS, when it asks if the home has a sump pump, it will right below that, it will say, what is a sump pump? And the seller can click on that and get information so they know, you know, more about what they're answering. So it's pretty nice. I just did this all funny, but it does give you, the seller just walks through it really easily. So for instance, one of the questions is, what's the assessor's parcel number? Well, then they can click on, how do I get assessor's parcel number? I would already fill that in for your sellers, but it gives you a little bit of information. So as you go through, or the seller goes through, it will give them more information. This one's not super complete because it's a simpler form, but that is something that makes it really nice for your sellers. It gives them a lot of information as they go. And if they don't complete something when they go, so for instance, if I didn't have this completed, then when they go to submit, it won't let them. That's interesting. So here's where it asks if you want to pay for it, but it won't let you submit it all the way if it's not fully completed, the TDS and the SPQ. It gives them a little red bar. It didn't here in the residential one, but it makes it really nice because they have to complete it, you know, fully complete it. And then once they're done, they can go in and sign it. So you can also send it to them for signatures, but it's really nice because it does give them the ability to just go through and answer all the questions. And when they don't know information, it gives them more information along the way. So I encourage you to give it a try. Obviously, don't know it all completely yet, but I think it's really, I filled out a TDS and it was so clear as a seller. And it really gave a ton of great information. So I felt like a seller would feel really confident answering the questions without, having their hand held quite as much. So.
And I imagine this, I'm going to ask Vicky about this protection thing, but we've explored some services actually that where you can buy a seller protection for disclosure items and stuff like that. And this firm that offers the quote insurance or the guarantee protection will defend the claims up to a point, $5,000 or something, and they take on that liability if it should go to mediation or stuff like that. So that might be the same vendor. I'm curious to look a little further into that.
Okay. Yeah, it looked like it was if you buy it, if the agent buys it, it looks like the minimum is for 2-year protection is $299.
Yeah.
And then if the seller buys it, it's $399. So it could be something we would want to, agents would want to cover. Pam?
Interesting. Yeah, Pam.
Have you used this online seller disclosure feature in Glide? And
I have.
And if so, how do you compare the two?
So that's what I have been using for the last year or so is Glide. And I think they're similarly very easy to use for the seller. I like that this Seller Shield gives those little yellow exclamation points in the questions, because I find people have a ton of questions, right? When they're filling it out, they're like, what is that? What am I supposed to? And it gives them a lot of dialogue about, if you don't, it explains a lot that normally we would verbally explain. So I did like that. I also like the way it asked the question. At the beginning of the TDS, there's that question about if there's any substituted disclosures. And I think in Seller Shield, it asked that question a lot more clearly. I think in Glide, a lot of people don't really understand and they just say no. And so I think that I like the way it asked it in Seller Shield. I think it's going to be a lot more clear for sellers.
So when you use that feature in ZipForms, does that assume that you've decided to do your whole transaction in ZipForms?
Oh. I don't.
Well,
I
I
always
don't-
start my
I
transaction.
I don't think those two are tied together. No,
Yeah.
no, we just still use our TC and so forth.
No,
It's
no,
just-
I don't mean, that's not what I meant. I mean,
Oh.
do you like start your do you like not use Glide at all for that transaction? If you're going to use the ZipForms for sellers disclosures, do you just go ahead and use ZipForms for the whole transaction?
You know, I always have used ZipForms because that's what I knew first, and only used Glide for the TDS and the SPQ. So
Oh,
you can do it, you know, really however, whatever works
yeah.
for you. If you know, if you're going to do your whole transaction in Glide, it might make sense to just keep it all there.
Yeah.
But I like the way ZipForms does a lot. So
Okay, just wondered.
yeah.
One thing to be careful of, peeps, with Glide is it autofills signatures, and it will autofill a signature that you don't want to have signed by your seller. So just review everything before you send it over. You don't,
Right.
In any autofill, you know, digital signature, that's a good idea because
yeah,
it'll miss things or it'll add you know, so
Yeah.
it's good to definitely
Yeah.
review it.
yeah, it did that for me on a backup offer. It added a signature in that the previous transaction had been canceled.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
like, what do I do? So I ended up just having a conversation and going, you know what, we need to redo this. So anyway, just be careful and review if you're using an app that autofills, so that you don't have to go into, you know, you don't have to drag and drop. They're
Gotcha,
already
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eric, you have your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, that's a good thing. Good start. Heather, in a previous class, you talked about ZipForms updating the templates. And I went into my templates and I realized that there was no cover sheet attached to the template. And I couldn't see how to attach a cover sheet to the template.
Backslash, you start to see, you know, countertop or this or that, and it adds 0 value to the property or to the rental.
Go ahead.
Mute myself.
Sorry.
I can I can show you real quick if
That'd be great.
let's see. Oops.
Because I was just wondering when the cover sheet comes in, because I wanted to fill it out, but I couldn't find it to attach it.
Okay, so let's see. So when you're going to templates,
Yes,
then it'll just take me a second to get there. Can you guys all see all my templates here?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, so let me find a weird one. I'll pull up vacant land listing. Oh, it already has a cover sheet. I'm just trying to think if there's one that,
when I pulled up my
Darling?
when I pulled up my existing templates, none of them had cover sheets.
that's strange. So here's a template I have that doesn't have a cover sheet. I think it was just partially made. All you have to do when you're in the template. So
Yeah.
you go into the template, not in a transaction. You go into the template, then you can just go and add any document, just like in a transaction. So you just go to the forms library up here and then you click on cover sheet and it'll add it for you.
Huh.
If you're having trouble with it, you can give me a call. Like we can set up a time when I'm at my computer too, and just kind of walk you through it. The big thing is you have to be in the template section.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people forget and they're over in transactions. They just add it to that transaction, not to the template. So it should be added just fine.
Okay, no, that's simple. I don't know how I missed it because I did go to add documents, but just didn't
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah, it's the very top one there typically. So
That would
yeah.
make sense.
Yeah, like I said, let me know if you can't, if it's not working for you, and I'll try to help you troubleshoot it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, well, thank you for hanging out for the hour, and hopefully we covered some good information. Thank you, Heather. And let's see if next week we're doing this again. 21st. Yeah, looks like we'll have a sales meeting at 10 and then the contract training at 11. So,
I won't be here.
okay, you got your board meeting?
Yeah, the North Bay board meeting.
Okay, I'll make a note of that then. Great, everybody, and thanks, and reach out if you have any questions offline, and have a great weekend ahead.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.